Welcome everyone to Have History Will Travel. I am your host, the Wilder Historian, and the patrons over on Patreon voted for me to highlight Ohio's contest for statehood to answer the question, how did Ohio become a state? If you would like to support the channel and vote on these polls, please join the Patreon page for as little as $1, and the support is much appreciated. Ohio has a rich Native American history that stretches back thousands of years. One of the most impressive is the Hopewell culture. You can now visit a site of that group of people near Chillicothe, Ohio in the form of a National Park Service unit, Hopewell Culture National Historical Park. After I visited that location in 2018, I came to appreciate the vast trade networks between Native American groups that span great portions of the North American continent. Their impressive mound building inspires awe when visitors see these structures. By the 1700s, 3 Native American tribes dominated the region, the Mingos, the Shawnee, and the Miami. When the Delaware, who lived along the eastern coast, ceded land to the Euro-Americans, they moved into the Ohio region as well. It needs to be mentioned that the Iroquois Confederacy claimed vast parts of the Northwest and Kentucky within their domain as well. Early in colonial history, the area now known as Ohio was sought as a valuable land. Its location connected to some of the Great Lakes and the Ohio River made it a prime location for an economic hub. Colonies like Virginia, Pennsylvania, and others either wanted or claimed the Ohio Territory as their own. Likewise, France, still a colonial power in North America, claimed the Ohio Valley as theirs because of the past exploration they had done. It would be Governor Robert Dinwiddie, who was an investor in the Ohio Company and stood to lose money if France made good on their claim of the region, that sent 21-year-old George Washington to basically tell the French to get out on behalf of Virginia. Partly as a result of this confrontation in the Ohio Territory, the French and Indian War erupted. The resulting Treaty of Paris ended hostilities between the British and the French, and the Ohio Country went to Great Britain. After the American Revolution, Britain ceded the Ohio Country to the United States, and a host of companies descended upon the landscape to hopefully get a piece of the economically viable land. However, the selling of that land would be reserved for the federal government. The Land Ordinance of 1785, constructed by Thomas Jefferson, declared that the land north of the Ohio River, east of the Mississippi River, and south of the Great Lakes would be divided up by the government and to set aside land for townships and schools. This would also help guarantee that those who bought land in Ohio and other Midwestern states would not suffer the same fate as many who had bought land in Kentucky. In the Bluegrass State, various land companies and surveyors created a system of shingle surveys where people's land overlapped. Lawsuits broke out, and it was said that if you bought land in Kentucky, you bought a lawsuit. The Land Ordinance of 1785 would help to guarantee to settlers that the land they bought was theirs, giving them the confidence to purchase the land. Additionally, the Articles of Confederation, the first government of the United States, which was the government the country was under at the time, did not have the power to levy taxes, so the best possible revenue stream for the government was the selling of land. This would ultimately help fund the government. The Northwest Ordinance of 1787 went in a political direction with the land set aside by the Ordinance of 1785. It stated that the territory would be divided up by no less than 3 and no more than 5 states, and that once the population of said state reached 60,000, that it could apply for statehood. The ordinance also encouraged the building of a public university to educate the American populace. It also established what a territorial government would look like and declared that the government would be controlled directly by the federal government and not any individual state. Finally, it forbade slavery in the Northwest Territory. Not long after that piece of legislation was passed, the United States became governed by the Constitution and the Articles of Confederation were done away with. Ohio had a statehood movement take hold of it in 1786, when a failure to create a separate state out of western Pennsylvania failed. Those men crossed into what is now Ohio and attempted their statehood proceedings from there, but it also failed. Much of the potential state was still occupied by Native Americans, and to build up the population necessary to apply for statehood, many Americans called for the expulsion of those tribes. President George Washington sent General Mad Anthony Wayne with federal troops into the Ohio country to disperse the tribes and secure it for white settlement. The culmination of the campaign came at the Battle of Fallen Timbers and the Treaty of Greenville that followed, which secured the Ohio country from Native American tribes and prevented the British from garrisoning locations south of the Great Lakes. By the time that took place, Cincinnati, Marietta, and Chillicothe were growing fast by territorial standards. Furthermore, Major General Arthur St. Clair had been appointed territorial governor of the Northwest Territory. The Scotsman-turned-American general resigned from the army after what was termed St. Clair's defeat, where over 600 American soldiers were killed during the Northwest Indian War. However, he still remained governor of the territory. He was a member of the Federalist Party, and he asserted tight control over the people of Ohio. The legislature of the territory, meeting in Ohio, attempted to give the local townships more self-government, but St. Clair vetoed their attempt. He made derogatory comments toward the frontiersmen who attempted to pass laws in the territory. He called them a multitude of indignant and ignorant people, but ill qualified to form a constitution and state government for themselves, and firmly believed that frontiersmen at best have no leisure from the cause to provide for their future welfare to employ their thought on abstruse questions of government and policy. The Federalists wanted to stay in power. However, the Democratic Republicans held a majority in the territory. Therefore, if the territory became a state, then the Federalists would lose their political power in the West. St. Clair's vetoing of those laws was an attempt to secure the political power of the Federalists. One way to secure that power was to divide the potential state of Ohio into two, with the Scioto River being the border, with Cincinnati in the west and Marietta in the east as possible capitals for their respective areas. If they were separated, they wouldn't have a big enough population to apply for statehood. With the suppression of statehood political moves, the people of Ohio became discouraged, but in 1800 they were about to be given a way to renew their statehood efforts. In that year, Congress officially made the Indiana Territory, which outlined its border with what would become Ohio as the border we see today, not the Scioto River. Ohio would not be split into two territories to prolong its territorial status. Also, Chillicothe became the new capital of that territory. Immediately, Cincinnati and Marietta went to work to restore the capital to Cincinnati, even scheming with Governor St. Clair, who had lost favor in the East, and the only way for him to rise up politically would be in the territory and the future state. The men from Cincinnati reduced the number of places where voting could be done in order to limit the number of representatives from those areas that might take the capital away from Cincinnati. Although it initially worked, a new law making voting locations more widespread allowed for more citizens to vote and keep the capital at Chillicothe. The Enabling Act of 1802 called for the admittance of Ohio as a state. In November of that year, delegates met at Chillicothe to construct a state constitution. The majority were Democratic Republicans. During the convention, Governor St. Clair made a speech to the Assembly that stated that Congress could not amend the Northwest Ordinance of 1787 with the Enabling Act. He went out of his way to criticize the actions of the federal government. A copy of his speech was sent to President Thomas Jefferson, who removed him as governor for challenging the authority of the United States over the territory and replaced him with Charles Byrd. By the end of that same month, the delegates had drawn up the Constitution to send off to Congress. They created a bicameral legislature, with a House of Representatives and a Senate. They heavily limited the powers of the governor and made all representatives and governors serve short terms in office before having to be re-elected. They reaffirmed that slavery would not be introduced into the state, and in a close vote, it agreed that African American males would be prevented from voting. On February 19, 1803, Thomas Jefferson signed the bill that made Ohio a state. The name came from the Ohio River, which got its name from the Seneca word for Great River. The capital remained at Chillicothe until 1810. Then it was moved to Zanesville for 2 years, then back to Chillicothe until 1816, when it was moved to the geographical center at Columbus. Thank you all so much for watching. Please consider supporting the channel by joining the Patreon page and sharing the video. If you become a patron, you can vote on each month's statehood videos. Thank you all again, and have a great day.
Historian, where do you roam? Historian, far from home. Have history will travel reads the card of a man, a professor with knowledge in the heartland. To educate the world is his mission. A professor of fortune is a man called historian.